Hello, Charles.
How are you?
I am lovely. It's about 80 degrees here in Chicago today. Thinking about going and having a sandwich for lunch, sit outside.
Must be nice.
We got 8 inches of snow on our way this week,
Wow.
and uh, and my truck's in the shop. My floor, we got
You
a.
could always borrow Ashes.
Well, I think my car is actually probably better than Ashley's truck.
You might have a point there.
A stupid deer ran into the side of my truck, and
Sounds about right. They're bigger up there too.
yeah, this out of nowhere, man. It was just before New Year's Eve, driving down on my way to northern Wisconsin. All of a sudden, bam! This thing runs into the side of the stupid truck, and then now it's 2 weeks to fix the stupid.
Supply chain. It's finest.
You know what? I think that actually might be part of the case here. All right, it is noon, and welcome everybody to the Cutting Edge. I see 3 people there. Let me pull up LinkedIn so I can see the folks all streaming in here. There we go. All right, we're live. Perfect. How's life treating you down there in the bayou? No, you're not in the bayou. You're in the low country.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, it's interesting. It's cold. We got 1/4 of an inch of snow Saturday morning, actually,
Yeah,
and there's still snow on the ground, which is kind of surprising.
I say normally that lasts like an afternoon, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Um, did you watch the football games this weekend?
No, I try to spend as much time with my kids as I can, honestly, because I work too much.
No, I hear you. Fortunately, well, I don't know, my son loves football, so we watched football together. That was kind of fun.
That's good.
All right, so let's talk lumber and getting ready for this call. You and I had to chat. The theme is there is nothing consistent right now.
No, it's super sloppy. I mean, from region to region, species to species. And I think it's risk transfer at its finest, honestly.
What do
If
you
you want to
mean?
sell
What do you
something,
mean?
if you want to sell something, if you want to sell something, you're going to have to give somebody a locked in price and you're going to have to bear that risk, hedge it somehow, or just take it and see what happens. Um, you got price discrepancies of $50 to $100 from one buyer to the next and from one mill to the next, depending on what's going on. So it makes things more than interesting,
Is
to say
is
the
this
least.
the new norm? I mean, at, we're a percent markup business, right? And when prices escalate like this, 5% of 1,000 is a heck of a lot more than 5% of 350, right?
Mhm.
Um, so, I mean, do you think that maybe this is going to be kind of the new norm as we have 4-digit pricing? We're going to see wider spreads than we're used to.
I think a lot of that's going to have to do with what happens on the single and multifamily housing demand front, because I mean ultimately those are the biggest consumers of this stuff, right? So if you continue to have cheap money, you're going to continue to have a desire and a need that's going to have to be fulfilled. The question is what volume is that? Number one, and number two, you know, Southern yellow pine historically is a species that is traded a lot differently than spruce is. Um, spruce as a whole, there's guys and floors that go out there and find numbers and then adjust accordingly day to day, hour to hour, from lunch to 2 versus 9 to 11. Where Southern yellow pine wasn't that way historically, but that may be the new norm. As far as having pricing with a comma in it, I don't know. I mean, that's going to be one of those things to where it really depends on how things move along and what
Well,
happens with monetary policy and the demand.
educate me a little bit on that last comment about the Southern pine historically uh, hasn't priced like spruce. So previously, how would pine get priced?
Well, I mean, you know, it's a traded species, but it's not a traded species the way spruce is traded. And I think
Okay.
a lot of that has to do with the fact that the consuming region that eats that product up is within 200 miles of a mill, whereas somebody that's shipping something from BC to Texas or Eastern Canada to an Atlanta reload, they've got some time to finagle and find markets and find one guy here, two guys there This guy
Yeah,
will
right.
take a car. This guy wants three, whatever. So it's traded a little bit differently. I
Well,
think
and we had the guy from Vicksburg on just talking about log decks. In Canada, they start building the log deck as soon as the ground freezes, and they get a 4 or 5 month log deck, right? And this
that's
guy's telling me the most they could get in a pine mill is maybe 6 weeks of log deck.
well,
So
it depends on how the mill's set up, right? I mean, and it depends on the log spec. A lot of that has to do with, and I think historically loggers are is a kind of a dying breed in the South, and I think they deserve a little bit more respect and a little bit more money than they've been getting paid. Due to the fact that there's so much information readily available as far as what Southern Yellow Pine 2x4s are trading for, selling for, versus what they're delivering a ton of saw timber to a can for a regional player or whoever. It makes it extremely difficult for those guys to have a lot of gumption because those margins are. You talk about a percentage basis, right? Markup basis. I mean, some of those guys have $1.5 million sitting in the woods to move 5 to 10 loads of saw timber a day, and
yeah,
it's an extremely tight business, and I think that has a lot to do with how log decks are built. But I also think too, Canada's set up a little bit differently with their infrastructure and how they receive those logs. Because correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of those British Columbia and Eastern mills, I mean, they have rail siding where they accept logs via rail. We don't do that here.
yeah. I mean, there's bottom line is there's lead time, a lot longer lead time with the Canadians versus the Southern Yellow Pine.
Yep.
And that probably adds to some of that volatility, of course. Um, but historically, I mean, pine is always quoted off a print, right?
That's a safe statement. Yes, sir.
Which,
I'm happy you said that, not me.
well, logically, it doesn't make sense to me. Why don't I say, oh, I'm at $1,000 as opposed to, well, I'm $200 over print? Like, if it's the same thing, why say 200 over, 200 under, or whatever?
Well, it's a different way to approach the market. And once again, when you're a Canadian or a spruce seller, a trader in general, you have some time, and that time gives you the ability to figure out how to present your finished good. Where Southern Yellow Pine is, this stuff's sitting 80 miles from where I'm sitting right now, and I can go to 5 different mills within 80 miles. So it's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
so it's all about approach and market share, honestly.
All right, well, let's talk about the pine market as long as we're there. I mean, your business, you bring something in and turn it into something more valuable. So, what's the items that you're watching right now to bring in, and what's your experience in the last week here?
Very fragmented markets. I think in all species, though. I mean, if you go from the east to the west to central, you know, west side 2x6s are astronomically tight, and in the central it's loosening up a little bit. But on the east side, I mean, prime example is you can't find 2x6 14 number two or better, but you can find it somewhere else. But then your freight completely destroys any price advantage you had, so you're back to the drawing board. So the key items we watch are 2x6 number two and better, and 2x4 number two and better. We're a real heavy narrow trading outfit, whether it's a reman or a wholesale trade distribution scenario. But as a market as a whole, the 2x8 dimension is probably the weakest in Southern Yellow Pine. But
Okay.
it'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out with some wet spring weather and some of the foul weather that we've had down here, to see if some of these logging crews and mills can get your bigger logs for your wides, which in turn would obviously either create a surplus or a negative inventory position for somebody that's cutting 2 to 10 and wider.
All right. Now, you're using the narrows. You're trimming them back to stud trims that some of your customers want. What are you finding for the feedstock for your studs?
Touch and go. I mean, you've got some mills that are open to have conversations about volume and some mills that aren't. And once again, I think it goes back to what their order file is and their inventory position. You have some guys that sold into it real heavy and they're just sitting back and waiting for, week 2/7, week 2/14 to come to them and just kind of see what happens versus getting aggressive. But I don't know. I believe in staying in the market every day and trying to be as competitive and moving in some volume as you can. But I have a different perspective than most. So.
Yeah, and you take a look at I'll take a peek at the futures market here. There's no commas right now. Everything's below a
No.
thousand. Um, So it's pretty wild. I look at the futures and then I look at some of the offers on our platform today, and I see 50% difference. I mean, that's a big difference, right? Also, fourteen
It's a
hundred
huge
versus
difference.
900. Like, whoa. Um, so yeah, there's just differences kind of everywhere. One of the things we're seeing these last weeks, is OSP, and from what I understand, the contracts are priced significantly higher than where the spot market's trading.
Well, the contract's lower than the spot market. Opposite.
Oh, I'm sorry, spot. Okay. Um,
So that's why, you probably have a lot of OSB that's posted on the exchange because you got guys that have extra contracts that people are pushing them off because they don't want to buy them, and then somebody all the way across the country needs it, and you can ship 32,000 square foot of truck. It freight's friendly versus trying to ship a 21,000 board foot truck of Southern Yellow Pine or plywood at 24. So there's a big difference.
yeah, we're seeing 7/16 move in all different directions. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Um, what about Southern Yellow Pine 15/32 plywood versus 7/16?
The only time personally, I'm not an expert at this, but the only time I've had or seen or experienced a big substitution for those two items is if they're using it for roof sheathing, and they use a roof sheathing at 15/32 struck one, and it gives them a little bit more of a firmer footing, right? It's a better overall product, some would say, open to opinions. But I don't think pricing is at the point where you're going to see a big substitution scenario. I mean, if you look at print, comparatively speaking, I mean, you're talking about $140 spread between plywood and OSB. So it's going to have to come meet somewhere in the middle before that happens more more often, I should say, than it is currently.
Yeah, sometimes though it doesn't take much, just that incremental,
No.
flip, one small segment of the market. Let's say guy building chicken coops decides, well, why would I put 7/16 on here when I can put, 15/32 and save myself 10%. All of a sudden that could flip back and forth, pretty quickly. Um, what about the 2x6 18 footers? I know
That's
that.
kind. I mean, there's not a lot of mills that cut them, so it's a real finicky market. Some have them, some don't, and those that do, maybe they had volume last week. They don't have any anymore, so they're quoting 2 to 3, maybe 4 trucks at a time, and discounts aren't as big as some would expect them to be, right? I mean, because once again, you look at the futures market, which is a derivative of Canadian spruce, but the pine market is a derivative of both. So if there's downward pressure on one, there's going to be downward pressure on the other. Not to mention that pine over the past 8 weeks has traded at such a premium over Canadian or European spruce. So it's kind of got to come back to reality versus its kissing cousin, for lack of a better way to describe it, for people to really jump back in the market and say, okay, that sounds like a good value. This sounds like a good value, and depend on what they sold into it at. That's going to be the other side of it, because some people had to take business at some pretty aggressive numbers in order to get orders. And whenever that sweet spot is achieved, it's kind of like what happened in November. I mean, you blinked and 2 days later you had 3-week order files.
Right.
And there was no spruce and a reload sitting around to be had. So once again, it's a matter of the market consensus of that sweet spot and whatever that looks like. But unfortunately, I don't think I know anybody that has a crystal ball to tell them what that looks like. So you either follow it all the way down and average down throughout, write off some of your inventory value to kind of stay competitive, or you sold it at higher numbers than what your input costs are. There's not a whole heck of a lot that goes into it.
You touched on euro. Now, in the ripping markets, we know that that wood was getting sold when it's on the boat, maybe still at the port in Europe. Are you seeing or hearing any more unsold wood showing up in the ports?
Yes and no. It's a very big mix. I don't think spruce traders have gotten very aggressive yet, because pine once again had to come back down to reality to kind of figure out where that sweet spot was. And if it pierces that floor, I think you'll start to see spruce guys get a little bit more aggressive. Even though, from our experience over the past 10 days, we've seen guys, wanting to offer firm numbers at relatively large discounts for 2.5 week wood, and relative to where it's at now. So once again, it goes back to the fact that you mentioned futures contract no longer has a comma, and you got $1,400 studs posted on the exchange. Which one's right? I don't know. The question is who needs it, who has it, and who doesn't.
Well, futures is the front month is March, so you're talking April wood, and it's January 31st. So they're different animals today.
Completely.
Yeah. So in essence, what I'm hearing though is pine may have gotten ahead of itself a little bit. It ran significant premium to spruce. It's kind of getting right sized right now, and spruce is crazy as it may sound. Spruce is kind of the steady Eddie right there.
Yeah. Surprisingly enough, yes. I think you'll see a pullback on it, but it'll take a little bit of time.
All right. Let's I want to bring up a chart you and I just talked about. This one fascinates the hell out of me. This was John Burns put this up on LinkedIn. By the way, shout out to John Burns and all of his really good data. If you don't follow him, I highly recommend. He and his team they follow the housing market better than anyone I know about there. So this is a chart. It's the housing inventory under construction and authorized, not yet started. So basically it means anything that's in the process of being built or that they have a permit for. And we have more homes and apartments under construction now than any time in the last 45 years. So, one of the things we can say to this is we know that the duration to finish a house has jumped significantly. I think you threw a number out. What did you say, 40% about?
Yeah, 35 to 40%.
And it has a lot to do with the availability of ancillary items. Because it seems like lumber's not the shortage right now. What you said something when we were talking that you heard about concrete pipe.
Yeah, I had a guy tell me they had to push back development of a new road in a master plan community because they couldn't get the pipe manufacturer couldn't get the rebar to reinforce the concrete pipe. So they have had to kind of put it on pause, surprisingly enough, and go from there. Step back and punt, I guess.
You can't even break ground. But what about, are you seeing any of the multifamily jobs get pushed off just because they want to try to find better pricing maybe down the road?
I think there's a piece of that, but it also brings into question too. I mean, okay, you got a job that's starting in March. Well, that's kind of an arbitrary timeline. Is it the beginning of March, middle of March, end of March? In this market, that can mean a huge difference in pricing. But then on the flip side, if you have somebody like us that sells hot and heavy in multifamily space, a majority of our February wood, early March wood is pretty much spoken for, right? So you either take it short, find a way to hedge it, or they wait until they think there's an opportunity to buy. So I think it's a perfect storm of, all the variables and no clear-cut answer. It's just everything's kind of in a vacuum, and it takes a lot to kind of dissect. So it's better to just wait.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke with a multifamily builder 2 weeks ago, and he's booked for the year. They're done. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh wow, that's pretty amazing. Are you going to add some more people? He said no, because there's the incremental cost to add more people is too high, or to add more business. He's like, I can run my business for this year and do just fine. I'm not interested in adding more complexity, more headaches to my business, which I found that kind of fascinating. But that plays into this. Obviously, if he's got work for the rest of the year, that everything's permitted, ready to go, right?
Oh yeah, it makes his life a lot easier.
And then last week I spoke with a big home builder, national home builder, who is having a hard time finishing houses because they couldn't get flex tubing for their HVAC system.
Yeah. Well, I heard a lot of multifamily guys aren't getting pricing on HVAC until it's delivered. week of delivery. I don't really know how you budget that, but
Well, basically, it's whoever wants to pay the most that week is going to get the delivery, right?
but I mean, all they're doing is setting up shipping times, and then they, based on available product, they ship it, and then then your customer is going to get a price. So it's kind of crazy,
Yeah.
to
Well,
say the least.
when I look at this chart here, one of the things I definitely see in there, we know the downturn happened in 2008. Granted, that was 12 years ago, but it's still the ramifications of that are going through the system. Our housing stock is as old as it's ever been. Um, the population hasn't changed. Like we need houses. Um, do you think that we can consume this onslaught of houses that we got coming in? Um,
I don't think we'll have a problem consuming it as long as the fiscal policy stays where it's at. I think it turns into a situation to where, from our standpoint in our business, is can production keep up with it? And I think Greg mentioned it either last week or the week before on his show with Ash on Wednesdays. Um, you know, BC is a shadow of its former self, and what are we going to do to replace it? And how do we replace it? I don't know the answer to that. And you've had a couple investments in new Southern Yellow Pine mills across Southeast that, when markets were as hot as they are now last year, they were going to spend all this money, make 150 million, $200 million investment, and all of a sudden they pull the plug on it because then everything sinks back to reality. So I don't know. I think it's going to take a lot of people getting together and understanding what the risk versus reward is to determine how and when do you increase that production level to see if we can consume or not consume, produce for that level of production.
right, right. Oh, I think for the foreseeable future, you can sell every home you build. Um, the question is, when is the whole supply chain going to free up and kind of allow these houses to get finished and get delivered into the system? Um, let's bring things right back to current day. Um, Obviously, we're seeing some discounts coming out of the mills. Um, a friend of mine at a big chain yard said he was giggling last week or before the big pullback in lumber futures. Oh, I got nothing. I don't know when I'm going to have anything. All of a sudden, futures pull back. Hey, I got some trucks for this week. What do you think? And now, granted, if that's some hedged inventory, it can start coming off. Or the pullback in futures allows them to sell that inventory. But I, I think that there was a little bit of monkey business going on. Guys trying to ride this thing higher. Um, but nonetheless, in the last 2 weeks, it's not. I'm not going to be running chasing the market higher. People are sitting back and bidding, and they seem to be getting the bids. They seem to be having their bids get hit, right?
Oh yeah, I don't think it was really monkey business. I think a lot of it has to do with supply chains and the fact that in December mills did a really good job selling into it, and it kind of lasted them through 4 or 5 week lead times. The week before Christmas, and then they were off for the holidays, and then a little bit of wood showed up, and it created another buying storm, and then it kind of just dissipated. Some mills sold into it pretty hot and heavy. Week 2.7 now. I mean, that's a solid 2 weeks. And we'll just kind of see what happens. It's anybody's guess.
Well, we do know that the Northeast got smoked with that storm, um, so that's going to put a damper on things. Chicago and the south of Chicago is supposed to get hit with a storm this week. I mean, I know. Look, weather is a very short term factor, but in my history, it's like just when the market's ready to get a little bit weak, if you get a storm at the same time, and everybody's attitude changes, it can put a little acceleration to those prices in whatever direction they're moving. So,
It
right
gives
now, if you
everybody a
look,
chance to sit back and contain their thoughts.
yes, basically that's that's what it means. Um, all right. Well, let's just to wrap this up. One last question for you: when do you anticipate having to price Q2 wood? Like guys coming in saying, "I want to do some Q2 pricing."
Oh, I think the next 30 days is going to tell the tape on that, because we're not
So,
too far off from the big spring buy. And if you got big spring buy coming, this market peels off $200 the next week. I mean, you're talking huge discounts.
Right. And so today's January 31st. February always flies by because they cut a few days off the end of it way back when. All of a sudden we could find ourselves March 1st. And these guys want a 30-day or 60-day pricing at that point, right?
Makes it extremely difficult that time of year. No doubt about it.
Right. So, all right. It's, I guess what we've figured out today is the market is in, what'd you say? It was sloshy.
It's fragmented, sloppy.
Fragmented, sloppy, sloshy. If you see a deal, it's probably not a bad idea to get after it. And if you're getting pressed, you might have to pay up a little bit, but it's kind of all over the map, really what it comes down to.
Wild West. Welcome.
Welcome to the Wild, Wild West. All right, Charles, thank you very much. As
Yes,
always, the cutting edge, and we're getting the view through Charles's eyes where, he takes it, he cuts it up. Let me get rid of this thing. Maybe he sells it whole. Who knows? He's a bit of a magician.
Houdini.
He's a regular Houdini. All right. Have a good day, Charles. Everyone, thanks for watching. Remember, Materials Exchange is the place to go find the pricing in real time, live on our platform. For if you want to get on board, just give us a call. Talk to you guys later.
Thanks, Mike.